During that year, I had Olin suspension, so we packed that into it was actually a rifle case because it was long and it had foam, so we packed it into a rifle case and we sent it over. Um, so we put our suspension, our handlebars, our stuff on their practice bike, and they allowed us to use the rig, and they provided a mechanic as well, but we had to rent that for the weekend.
So let's talk Des Nations for a moment. 2012, you were selected to represent South Africa at the annual Des Nations in Belgium that year at Lommel. So that is for anyone that knows that circuit, it's probably the most toughest motocross track in the world. It's sand that keeps on breaking down. There's no base layer underneath. So after a full day of riding, you're still just in sand, and the track gets rougher and rougher. Americans that have been there, Ryan Villapoto, battles to ride on that track. So unless you're born in that environment, you've got to be a natural sand master. It has to be in you to be able to ride really well there. So the selection for that year, you were representing us in the 450 class in South Africa, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, and who was in your team?
So it was myself in MX1, it was Neville Bradshaw in MX3, or the open class, and it was Shannon Terreblanche in MX2.
Okay. And when you went over, was that part of your sponsorship that you had racing in South Africa? Did they pay for you to go over, or was that mainly self-funded?
To be perfectly honest, I think my sponsors they really did step up to the plate, and they helped. I know we did a raffle or two, try to fundraise, and personal friends helped out and all of that. Look, I mean, South African motocross, you're going to get sponsored to race in South Africa. That's the end of the line. And because the sport is a lot smaller, and even then it was expensive. I know now it's ludicrous, but you know, the fact of the matter is a lot of these teams run on tight budgets anyway. So to come up with the money just to go overseas is it's very difficult. So I know I certainly got help. I'm not going to say I funded everything. I certainly didn't. I got a lot of help through sponsors, through, like I said, friends and family. And it was tough. We had to rent a bike there, and they gave us a second-hand or a practice bike of one of the teams, which we were still grateful for. It was pretty good. During that year, I had Olin suspension, so we packed that into it was actually a rifle case because it was long and it had foam, so we packed it into a rifle case and we sent it over. So we put our suspension, our handlebars, our stuff on their practice bike, and they allowed us to use the rig, and they provided a mechanic as well, but we had to rent that for the weekend. Yeah.
And going back a few years, you were based in Belgium with Tinus. Did you ever ride that circuit?
I did. We practiced there quite a lot.
Okay.
We didn't live, from what I can remember, I don't think we lived too far from the track. And if you're serious about racing World Championship European, you're going to be based somewhere out of Lommel or close to Lommel. And Lommel isn't the hardest track. There are other sand tracks that are more difficult than Lommel. From what I can remember, I might be, this is a long time ago, so I can remember Tinus clearly telling me that there were other tracks that were difficult. And one comes to mind is a track called Berghem or Berghem, Berghem. Oh man, there are some of those Dutch tracks that are just the sand drops forever down. There's no base, and it just gets rougher. It's soft. It's absolutely brutal.
So you had a base setting, by the sounds of things, before you arrived. You knew what the bike needed to do. You weren't setting it up from practice one. You kind of knew where you're at, right?
Yeah. So again, that's the South African thing. Is we kind of had a setting that was good for a lot of tracks here. My dad was pretty good at watching the bike and seeing how it was reacting, and I'd come into the mechanics area. I'd say, yeah, it's maybe not doing this, or it's maybe not doing that, and it'd be like, yeah, I see it's doing that, so we'd adjust, and it would be a lot better. But like we've just established, coming from harder packed tracks, and even our sand tracks here in South Africa are nothing like it is compared to Lommel. So, like you said, there's no base, so the sand just drops down, and however deep the holes can go, they keep going. So it's not like it gets to a level. Certainly in Port Elizabeth or Cape Town, you've got that hard base underneath. So it will be sandy on top, but you'll get to that base in some sections of the track. But Lommel is just another beast completely.
Yeah. Geez, I went there in the 2016, and I was fortunate enough to be at an MXGP. And I walk out excited in the morning to go look at practice and smooth, and you think, yes, this is going to be lekker. And man, first practice out, and they've got the machines on the tracks fixing things because Oaks couldn't get up the face of the jump. It was too rutted. I've never in my life, so I'm actually have my foot in my mouth, hearing that there are more difficult tracks out there.
Yeah, and some of the sand tracks, what they would do is they'd either put the type of concrete or harder type sand on some of the takeoffs so that they don't break down as much. And the World Championships, they don't like touching the track, so they might fix some of the takeoffs and maybe some sections, but they'll leave it to get as rough and nasty as possible.
And in that year, who were the big names in 2012?
So it was obviously Caroli. I think in the American team it was Dungy and Barsha. Barsha struggled that year. I remember him crashing off the track or something into Chuck's son or something. Or Chuck's son helped him get his bike back. Or there was something along those lines. Anyway, so there was Nagel. There was obviously our team. Neville was good. But I think he was riding with a hurt shoulder. So that was a bit crappy. Yeah, the biggest memory I can take away is we were first on the track. So we had the smoothest track, and I went out and I tried to take advantage of this as much as I could. And I remember, I think Ryan Ferrix, my buddy and trainer at the time, he came over and he was there for me, and we were doing this thing together. But at one stage, I'd set a fast lap, and my name was like second on the list, and he took a photo of that. So that was such a cool feeling. Obviously, I got dropped down, but my time, and you must remember, this sounds huge, but there'll be times when, like, Hurlings is 10 seconds faster than a really good guy. So at that, I think in my class, Caroli was the fastest in our group, and I think he was like 3 seconds or a couple of seconds faster than the next guy. And I clearly remember, I think I was 6 seconds off Dungy's pace. And at that level, at that track, it was just a cool feeling to be there. And I know, like, people might cringe and think, 6 seconds, that's a lifetime. But man, on those tracks, I'll tell you another aside just from that. Just to give you an explanation of how difficult these tracks are and how good the riders are at that level and those kind of conditions, is when I first went to Europe, I was going to do Dutch Championships, and that's all the deepest, gnarliest, nastiest sand tracks. And he said, okay, so we'll set some goals and we'll start thinking about how we're going to do this. And he said, the first time you race a Dutch Championship, the goal will be to not get lapped twice. Not to get lapped twice. And I was like, you're joking. And he was not joking, man. Those guys, and I remember the one race, I think I didn't get lapped, and it was such a big thing. And funny enough, Slade Smith, who's racing the AMA Pro Nationals now this year, he's doing really well. I think his best finish is 15th or something. And we heard, my wife and I were listening to a podcast that he was on, and he was saying one of his goals is not to get lapped during the moto. And, you know, from an outsider looking in, you think, if you're getting lapped, then you're absolute crap. But it is not the case, man. It's just the guys are at such a high level. And I think I didn't get lapped, or there was a milestone that we hit that was along those lines. But, yeah, going back to Lommel, being that far off, there's no shame. Well, certainly in my eyes, there's no shame in that, because we are so far behind when it comes to those types of tracks. Our bikes are not set up. We're not used to that, so we are at a disadvantage in the beginning. But at the end of the day, I was able to represent my country, something that I was super proud of, and I was able to race at the highest level of the sport, regardless of where I finished. That's a win in itself. So those are really good memories for me.